Imagine a typical suburban London street in 1972. Saturday morning. The air carries the smell of damp tarmac and cheap tobacco. But in Mrs Elizabeth Hudson's kitchen, the scent is quite different. A sterile, slightly sweet aroma of powdered gelatin hangs in the air. Elizabeth pauses in front of her greatest treasure, a massive Frigidaire refrigerator. In that era, a fridge did more than store food. It was an altar to technological progress, and its steady hum was the anthem of the middle class. Elizabeth reaches deep inside the machine and carefully removes a copper mold shaped like the crown of the British monarchy. Inside lies her masterpiece, Summer Madness. A multi-layered monument where pieces of tinned tuna, slices of boiled egg, and, for an extra touch of sophistication, pickled olives stuffed with red pepper are trapped inside a clear, almost radioactive lime jelly. For Mrs. Hudson, this is not merely a starter. It is a statement to the world. In 1970s Britain, the ability to turn an ordinary meal into a trembling, edible sculpture was the social equivalent of holding a degree from a prestigious university. Jelly became the culinary glue that connected post-war thrift with the suddenly emerging consumer society. If you could afford to seal your food inside a transparent shell, it meant you had both the time for such refinements and the freezer space required for them to set. Elizabeth straightens her apron and proudly admires her creation. What she does not yet know is that this culinary sarcophagus will soon cause the most humiliating disaster of her life. But before we cut into this trembling masterpiece, subscribe to the channel Britain Yesterday. Here we bring the true spirit of Britain back to life, from great triumphs to the strangest recipes your grandmothers ever made. Ring the bell so you're the first to discover what Britons of the past ate for breakfast, lunch, and occasionally regretted. Why did an entire nation famous for its conservatism suddenly decide that ham somehow tasted better if it looked like a museum exhibit sealed inside plastic? The answer lies in the supermarkets. The 1970s were the triumph of the canning industry. Shelves overflowed with tins, Spam, peaches in syrup, mixed vegetables known as macédoine. Yet serving food directly from a tin was considered lazy and rather vulgar. A proper hostess had to transform the product. Powdered gelatin became the magical dust of the era. Advertising leaflets from Birds and Jell-O insisted, "Your table must look modern." To Elizabeth Hudson and millions of women like her, fresh vegetables seemed dull and old-fashioned, a reminder of the grim wartime years. A transparent cube with prawns suspended inside, however, looked like something from the space age. This was the food of the future. It lasted for hours without spoiling and looked flawless, at least in the magazines. The central conflict of 1970s cuisine was a kind of aesthetic extremism. Recipes showed no mercy. One popular creation was the golden ring, where grated carrots sat beside pineapple beneath a layer of orange jelly. Housewives competed with one another. The more layers and the more dramatic the colors, the higher the status. Mrs. Hudson decides to go all in. For that evening's gathering, she prepares a dish her neighbor might call a challenge to public decency: jellied beef with mayonnaise mousse. By the middle of the decade, the obsession with aspic had evolved into a full-blown architectural competition. Cookbooks from the era now read like manuals for taxidermy or embalming. The phenomenon of party pieces emerged. Dishes designed not to be eaten, but to be admired for the first 5 minutes of a party. Mrs. Hudson studies the latest issue of Woman's Own. Across a glossy double page spreads the famous lantern salad. Two types of jelly form a hollow structure designed to hold a candle burning inside it. Elizabeth realizes something alarming. Her social status is under threat. Her neighbor 3 houses down, Mrs. Parker, recently served guests a jellied pâté shaped like a grand piano, complete with cheese keys. It was a brutal move. In response, Elizabeth decides to experiment with opaque jelly, a mixture of stock and thick cream which sets into something resembling expensive bone china. Yet this delicate architecture had a hidden enemy: British heating systems. During the 1970s, central heating began appearing in homes across the country. What set perfectly in a cold garage behaved very differently in a warm living room filled with guests. Gelatin is a temperamental substance. Too little powder and your piano collapses into a puddle. Too much, and your guests will need a chainsaw to cut their dinner. Mrs. Hudson stands on the edge of culinary catastrophe, desperately calculating the perfect formula for structural stability. Saturday evening arrives. The Hudson living room fills with the elite of the neighborhood: an insurance agent, a school teacher, and, most importantly, the local vicar, Father Thomas. The ladies wear crimpline dresses, the men sport wide ties, and polite conversation drifts through the room about the falling pound and the latest strikes. Then comes the moment of triumph. Elizabeth carries in Summer Madness. In the center of the table, beneath the chandelier's light, trembles a monumental green crown of jelly. But the moment the vicar plunges his knife into this masterpiece, the unthinkable happens. Hidden within the jelly is what Elizabeth considered the finishing touch: a decorative plastic swan, which in her haste she forgot to remove before pouring the final layer. The knife scrapes against plastic with a dreadful sound. A slab of jelly springs free and launches itself directly into Mrs. Parker's glass of sherry. A deathly silence falls across the room. In that moment, the great secret of 1970s cuisine is revealed. These dishes were almost impossible to eat. The texture of cold, slippery meat combined with faintly sweet gelatin created what modern critics politely call a gastronomic nightmare. The vicar, being a true gentleman, bravely attempts to swallow a piece, but his face quickly turns the same shade as the lime jelly. The prestigious dinner party becomes an exercise in suppressing the gag reflex. The illusion of modern luxury bursts like a soap bubble. By the late 1970s, Britain slowly began to sober up. Perhaps the growing number of food poisoning cases had something to do with it. After all, gelatinous monstrosities often sat on warm tables for hours, becoming perfect incubators for bacteria. Or perhaps people simply grew tired of food that tasted like rubber flavored with stock cubes. The fashion for transparency began to fade. From France came a timid breeze of nouvelle cuisine, where freshness mattered more than structural engineering. Refrigerators were no longer exotic status symbols, and demonstrating their power through jelly constructions became rather embarrassing. Jelly quietly returned to where it belonged: children's desserts and modest fruit cubes at birthday parties. The next morning, as Elizabeth Hudson scrapes the remains of her madness into the rubbish bin, she feels a curious sense of relief. No more 5-hour calculations of layers. She looks at the empty copper mold and realizes something profound. The era has changed. The 1980s are approaching, the decade of microwave ovens, fast food, and bold sauces. Gelatin castles melt under the sun of change, leaving behind only sticky stains in old cookbooks and a faint sense of embarrassment about past culinary ambitions. Today, the jellied dishes of the 1970s are a favorite subject for internet jokes and collectors of vintage magazines. We look at those lurid pink mousses and green Spam towers with disbelief. Yet hidden inside this quiet horror on a plate is a genuine piece of British history. It was a moment of naive optimism, when people believed technology could improve even the nature of taste itself. For Mrs. Hudson's generation, jelly was a way of bringing order to a chaotic world. If you could control the shape of your dinner, perhaps you could control your life. These trembling starters were portraits of their time, strange, awkward, yet somehow bright and full of aspiration, even if that aspiration smelled faintly of tinned tuna and lime. Looking back at these archival scenes, we are not simply seeing bad food. We are seeing a dream of a better life, sealed inside a transparent shell of gelatin. And perhaps somewhere in the attic of an old house in suburban Manchester, that very crown-shaped mold still lies waiting, ready at any moment to return and transform an ordinary Sunday lunch into an unforgettable culinary performance. What culinary masterpieces from the past do you remember? Did your family have recipes that now seem completely mad? Tell us in the comments. We're collecting the strangest gastronomic memories. And don't forget to like the video if your menu today contained no aspic whatsoever. You've been watching Britain Yesterday. See you next time when we continue tasting history.